This moment, this time, let us now welcome our first speaker, His Excellency, Most Reverend Honesto Ongtioco, Bishop of Cubao, to speak on the pastoral letter of the Holy Father, Pope Francis, on Saint Joseph, entitled Patris, Corde, translated with a father's heart. Yeah, go.
My dear brother bishops, Archbishop Tony Ledesma, Bishop Jesse Mercado, our dear President of the RP, All Natural Family Planning, Dr. Divina Lupe, Doctora, our dear Vice President, Director, George Pimentel. Sa mga hindi pa po nakakaalam, we were together in the seminary. So, he's no stranger to me. At sa lahat ng nakikisa sa ating webinar ngayong hapon na ito, mula sa Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, maraming salamat po sa inyong pakikisa sa ating pagninilay sa hapon na ito. So I'd like to thank in a special way ang Board of Trustees and George Pimentel at ang kanyang mga kasama, no, sa pagbuo ng series of webinar na ito po ay kailangan natin. I'm sure you will agree with me, nung nagsimula itong pandemya, akala natin mga 2-3 months lang. Ngayon, mahigit ng 1 taon at kalahati. How long will it still last? I don't know. Pero yung epekto po, malaki ng epekto. People getting depressed, people getting angry, people getting, stress, and then yung rate of violence. So maraming problema ang lumitaw. And yet, precisely, that's where our special apostolate is needed, ang ating pang-aalaga sa pamilya. So I'm happy that we have organized these different webinars to strengthen family life, because it is a must in our times today. We live in difficult times. At to make my presentation more focused, as it was mentioned, some reflections on Patris Corde, with a father's heart. So this was issued by Pope Francis. It's an apostolic letter on the occasion of the 150 years anniversary when Pope Pius IX declared Saint Joseph as the patron of the Universal Church. Salamat sa Diyos. We have this 1 year dedicated to Saint Joseph, by which we can reflect more on the life of this silent person. Hindi ba kayo nagtataka? Patron of Universal Church. Bakit hindi marami tayong naging santo sa mga papa? Why not a pope? Why not a bishop? Why not a priest? But a lay person in Saint Joseph. And he's not just the patron of the Universal Church. It's likewise the patron of Korea, China, Americas, Austria, Belgium, Philippines, patron of workers, travelers, unborn children, even of pregnant women. He's the patron of those who doubt and hesitate. Mga taong nagdududa, nagdadalawang isip. Joseph had the faith even if he did not understand everything. And when things were still unfolding. Kaya napakahalaga po ang dulot sa atin ni Saint Joseph as we celebrate this year of Saint Joseph. So the same time, sabi natin, what wives and husbands do not know. So, nabanggit po ni Mr. George Pimentel kanina, yung kahalaga ng mga tatay sa pamilya. No? In the Hebrew culture, it was the father who always led the prayer in the family. Kaya napakaganda, napakatibay ang kanilang pagkakaisa sa pamilya. And we know how important the role of fathers are. 2 days ago, we celebrate the feast of Saint Therese of the Child Jesus. Dahil sa banal ang kanilang mga magulang. Ngayon, santo na po yung parents ni Saint Therese of the Child Jesus. Ilan sila? 9. 5 lang ang nabuhay at puro babae. At lahat po ay nagmadre. They must have been inspired, formed well by their parents, especially through the example of the father. And Saint Therese reminds us of the little way na maaari nating ma-practice tayo mga magulang, especially during this pandemic. Ano yung little way? Be concerned not with big things, but even little things. Sabi ni Saint Therese, even just picking a pin with love, you can save a soul. So siguro po, ito ay isa sa mga magandang mensahe matandaan natin during this pandemic. We focus on the pandemic, on the virus, and yet we are asked to focus our attention, our hearts on Jesus, on relationships. This is what we discovered during this pandemic. We discovered what is really essential. We learn how to distinguish what is essential from non-essential. Akala na ibang tao, yung mga maraming bagay nagbibigay ng tuwa sa kanila. Shopping, going to places, these were essentials. But we were deprived. So nawala ito o nahinto. And yet, we could still be happy. So we learn how to discover the essential things in life. And of course, what surfaces is relationships. Relationship with God and relationship with others. At napakaganda, nagpapasalamat tayo sa Diyos, at least sa NCR, lumaki na po ang accommodation capacity. Before, it was only 10%. And before that, mga 10 people lang. Ngayon, 20%. So we see a lot of people coming back to church. Pero sabi nga nila, iba pa rin when you go to church. Though we could attend Mass via live streaming and receive spiritual communion, iba pa rin when you go to church and receive sacramental communion. So I feel so happy, delighted when I see parents, fathers bringing their children to church, though they're not allowed ngayon, kaya lang before, but even now, sometimes marahil walang maiwan sa bahay, so we still find some parents bring, but they could not stay inside the church. At sa ngayon, only those that are vaccinated, and yet you can still see people outside. Meron po kami halimbawa dito sa Cathedral of Cubao, meron kaming tents sa labas where people can stay and participate. So the year of St. Joseph is indeed a surprise. I'm sure not many of us expected, and yet it's a wonderful gift. We can learn much from Joseph, who is tender, loving, obedient, courageous, creatively courageous. At anong mapapansin po natin? He's always in the shadows or in the background of events and never on center stage. And yet we can see how important he is. Halimbawa, in the plan of God. Supposing he didn't say yes, I'm sure things would have changed. So we often focus on Mary. Of course, that's important. She's the mother of our Savior. And yet, Joseph was also a main player in the plan of salvation of God. And so, with his yes to God's plan, we can see the kind of man he was. Although the plan was not very clear, and yet, nandun siya, handang makiisa sa plano ng Diyos. So again, this is a beautiful virtue that we can learn from Joseph. So I would like to encircle, the God of Mary is also the same God that we see in Joseph, is the same God who guides us today. So the story of salvation continues even now, October 3, 2021. And so we have a role to play, and this is where Saint Joseph can help us as our model. So in Saint Joseph, we see that the God who revealed himself to him, the same God who continues to reveal to us, the God he believed, is a God of intervention. So tatlong bagay ng ating mapagnilayan po. The God of Joseph is a God of intervention. The God of Joseph, second, is a God of assurance. And third, the God of Joseph is a God of Emmanuel. So makikita natin, ang Diyos ay laging nakikialam sa buhay ng tao because He is love. Kaya masasabi natin, pakialamero ang Diyos because He cares for us. So He will always be there for us. So kumisan, He does not act the way we expect Him to act. For instance, matagal na tayong nagdarasal ng oratio imperat against COVID. Sabi natin siguro, Lord, kailan matatapos ito? Parang nakalimutan mo na kami. Parang hindi mo kami naririnig. And yet, in Joseph, we could see that we need a lot of faith. We need a lot of trust. Because in Joseph, we see our God is a God who intervenes in His time. Sa kanyang oras, sa kanyang panahon. You know, we have two Greek words for time. One is the regular, chronos, the sequence of time. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, January, February, chronology of time. Pero sa Bible, ang ginagamit po, kairos, fulfillment. The plan of God, the will of God is fulfilled. The moment when God intervenes. So, He intervenes many times, not just when we want Him, but sometimes we doubt. And yet, I believe we need more faith like Joseph. So meron po tayo sigurong naalalang kwento. We all know one of the patrons of young people, si Maria Goretti. She was very young when she died. So anong nangyari? I think all of us know that their neighbor by the name of Alessandro Saranelli, when the Maria Goretti was alone in the house. The mother was in the farm. He wanted to rape her. And yet, of course, she refused. And Alessandro stabbed her 15 times. She was brought to the hospital for surgery. Tandaan nyo, that time walang anesthesia. And yet before she died, she said, I forgive Alessandro because I want to see him in heaven. Alessandro spent 30 years in prison and hard labor. A miracle happened. Why? He repented and experienced conversion. Once he was released from prison, he immediately went to Maria's mother, Maria Goretti's mother, to ask forgiveness. And 48 years after Maria Goretti died, she was canonized by Saint Pius XII on June 24, 1950. But this time, both Alessandro would be rapists and Maria's mother were there. So Alessandro was a totally transformed person. God intervened. He became spiritual and became a different young man. So God always answers our prayers in His time. Kumisan, nainip tayo, sabi natin, ang tagal naman. How come God does not intervene when we want it? And yet, we have that song, He intervenes and makes all things beautiful in His time. So, we continue to pray. So, we can see how God can transform and change situations. Bago umupa yung mga malakas na alon, remember when they were on a boat ride, Jesus was just sleeping and there were big waves. And then when they woke him up, Lord, do you not care for us? He just raised his hand and said, be still. And yet, and the water, the ocean became peaceful. So Jesus allowed the waves to be strong first, to strike, so that the apostles could appreciate more His intervention. Alam po natin, the first miracle in the Gospel according to John, it was in a marriage. So they ran out of wine. And then, of course, Jesus comes in through the intercession of his mother. Son, they do not have wine. And Jesus turns the water into wine to save the newly married couple from embarrassment. So, my dear friends, God comes into our life when in His time, He would like to intervene. And it brings a lot of blessings. So sometimes we do not see it. Siguro natandaan po natin yung nagbisita si Pope Francis sa atin when he was speaking in UST. There was a young girl who approached the Pope, Pope Francis, and she relayed how, sabi niya, I can't understand, Holy Father. I'm so young and yet I'm experiencing many difficult things. And then the Holy Father said, I too, I cannot say, I cannot give a explanation. And yet God allows us sometimes to cry so that our vision can see better when they are cleared with our tears. So, our God is a God who always intervenes at the right time. And this we see in Joseph. In all his experiences, there were things I'm sure he didn't understand. Bago pa lang panganak si Mary, and they are asked to go to Egypt because Herod was after the life of the baby Jesus. And yet, he believed. That was a big leap for Joseph. Wala silang masyadong kakilala. Wala silang clear na kinabukasan sa Egypt, what will happen. And yet, he believed. And of course, in God's time, they were asked to go back to Nazareth. So, our God, the God who guided Joseph, is a God of intervention. And we can also say, He's a God who assures. Sabi niya kay Mary, fear not. Kay Joseph, fear not. Many times, we are told to just trust and to remove doubt and fear in our life, because God will always be there for us. Because He's not just a God who intervenes, a God who assures us. He is also a God who is Emmanuel. He's always present in us, listening to our prayers, caring for us each day. Marami tayong pinagdaanan, and yet when we look back, we can see that God was always there. Pinagdaanan po natin yung eruption ng Taal Volcano. Daming pamilya na sira ang kanilang buhay, pero ganito rin po sa pandemya. Many people have lost their jobs, have been hurt, wounded, tulero, gulong-gulo, di mapakali. Pero once we assist them, help them to believe in a God who assures of His protection and His help, then little by little, we can move on. So mahalaga po to believe in a God who always assures us, who always intervenes. Siguro matanda natin the repentant thief who was dying there with Jesus on the cross. He believed in Jesus. And so he asked Jesus, sabi niya, just remember me. Just remember me when you enter your kingdom. And what did Jesus say? There is that assurance. Today, you will be with me in paradise. The first canonized saint, it was even Jesus who canonized him. God will always come when it pleases Him, because He cares for us. So like Joseph, we are asked to put our total trust in His love, in His wisdom, in His ways. So alam ko po, marami pang magsasalita. Those are just a few thoughts that I can share, and I'll be with you until the end of this webinar, open for questions, for discussions. So inulit ko, our God, the God of Joseph, our God, is a God of surprises. It's a God who intervenes, He assures, and a God who is Emmanuel, a God of presence. He assures us, I will be with you until the end of time. God, as experienced by Joseph, never abandons his people. He is never absent. A God who is always walking, journeying with his people. He not only celebrates and rejoices with us, but he also cries and weeps with us. The precious thing we can give people we serve is our presence. The presence of parents with their families. Your presence in the church. So we give our precious time, our personal touch. And in doing this, we give the gift of ourselves. And we see how presence encourages, instills hope, joy, how presence heals, assures, and above all, presence creates happy and precious memories. So we hope and pray we'll give happy memories to our families, to our children, memories which they will always treasure. They can look back, that will give them inspiration, strength, and joy to move on. In spite of difficulties, in spite of trials and serious problems, we move on precisely because there is this loving, compassionate God who journeys with us. So ang ganda muna po siguro. As I said, I will be happy to discuss with you some of your reactions, and I'll be with you until the end of this webinar.
Thank you, Bishop Ness, for your wonderful insight on the fatherhood of Saint Joseph and God's intervention, presence, and Emmanuel, especially in our practice of fatherhood in our respective families. Thank you.